The three stories you're about to hear are real accounts from real people, ordinary people doing ordinary things. None of them went looking for what they found. But something found them. Let's begin.
It was a warm California evening, the kind where the air sits heavy and dry and the hills glow orange in the dying light. It should have been peaceful. A wildfire had broken out somewhere in the hills above the valley, and Engine Company 102 was already rolling out to back up the surrounding stations. Firefighter Harmon had seen fires before. He knew the smell, the sound, the way heat turns the air into a living thing pressing against you. But that night felt different. As the hours passed, the blaze spread further and faster than anyone expected. The radio crackled constantly. Crews were being stretched. Resources were running thin. And then came the call that Harmon had been dreading. Houses on the east side were on fire. 3 of them. And people were still inside.
2 trucks from Station 102 tore through the smoke-thickened streets toward the scene. When they arrived, the sight was devastating. The houses burned like candles lined up in a row. Families streamed out onto the lawns, some screaming, some silent with shock. A woman ran toward Harmon the moment he stepped off the truck. She was frantic, barely coherent, grabbing at his jacket and screaming that her daughter was still inside. 1st floor, bedroom near the front. She kept saying it over and over, like repetition alone could make it true. Harmon looked at the house. 2 stories. The entire upper floor was already consumed, a roaring, crackling ceiling of orange and black. But the 1st floor, there might still be time. He turned to his partner Jake, the 2 senior men on scene. He said, "We have to go in." They strapped on their protective gear, locked their oxygen masks in place, and crossed the threshold into the burning house. The 1st floor was thick with smoke, but visible, navigable. They moved fast, following the mother's directions through the haze, and found the bedroom. Inside, a small girl, maybe 10, maybe 12 years old, lay unconscious on the floor. They grabbed her and turned for the exit. That's when the ceiling came down.
It happened all at once. An enormous crash, a wall of fire and debris. The room disappeared behind a curtain of smoke so thick it swallowed everything. The doorway, the walls, each other. Harmon could not see his hand in front of his face. He could not see Jake. He could not see a way out. The oxygen masks kept them breathing, but every second that passed was a second closer to the end. The house was large. The smoke was absolute. And with a disoriented, unconscious child in his arms, there was no way to drop low, no way to feel along the wall. They were simply lost. And then a light appeared. Not the glow of fire, not the red flash of an emergency beacon. A single, clean beam of light, a flashlight, cutting through the black smoke as if the smoke wasn't even there. It made no sense. But Harmon wasn't questioning it. He moved toward it. And as they got closer, a figure took shape in the haze. A firefighter, standing completely still, waving them forward.
Harmon recognized him immediately. It was Ricky, a veteran firefighter, known and respected by everyone at the station. His helmet was unmistakable, a lucky helmet he'd carried through decades of service. His height, his posture, the way he stood, There was no question. Ricky pointed to a broken section of the wall where a sliver of daylight was just barely visible through the smoke. Harmon grabbed Jake. They moved. Seconds later, they were outside. Harmon handed the girl to the paramedics and turned around, breathless, to see when Ricky would emerge behind them. Nothing. Harmon was already turning back toward the house when the chief stopped him, grabbing his arm. Harmon told him Ricky was inside. He'd seen him. Jake had seen him. The chief stared at him. Ricky couldn't be inside that house. Ricky had died that morning, just a few hours earlier, trying to save an elderly woman trapped in a different fire across town. One of the other crew members was doing a head count. 2 trucks had responded to the scene, 9 firefighters total. All 9 were standing outside, accounted for. Every single one of them. Jake finally spoke. He said he knew it was Ricky. He recognized the helmet, Ricky's lucky helmet. He recognized his height, his build, the way he stood. He saw him clearly, he said. Like the smoke simply wasn't there for him.
Ricky's body was recovered the next day. His helmet was restored to the best Harmon could and added to Station 102's main hall as the last thing anyone would see leaving on a rescue.
Lucas was 23 years old. He lived with his parents in a small town south of Rotterdam, in the Netherlands. He had just graduated. By most measures, he should have been fine. He wasn't. Every job application came back with silence. His friends, the ones he'd grown up with, were already starting careers, moving forward, moving on. He watched from a distance as his world quietly closed its doors to him, one by one. His father was in his 70s and still working. Lucas hated the idea of being a burden, hated it so much it had become the only thing he thought about. That evening, he sat at the dinner table with his parents. He laughed at the right moments. He answered questions. He put on his best impression of a person who was fine. Then, he went upstairs. He changed into old clothes. He didn't want to ruin the good ones. He shaved. He fixed his hair. He thought about putting on cologne, but decided it would be a waste. He left a note on the side of the bed. Not hidden, but not obvious. Just there, waiting to be found. And then, he walked out of the house and into the night.
He let himself take the long way. He walked through the lit streets of the city center, past the restaurants and coffee shops full of laughter and noise. He allowed himself to smile a little. He even stopped to pet a cat that crossed his path. He was calm, he said. He wasn't frightened. He just felt done. His destination was a small walkway bridge on the edge of town, spanning a narrow river. He'd chosen it deliberately. It was quiet. It was out of the way. As the river came into view, he expected to feel afraid. He felt nothing. He climbed over the railing, looked down at the dark water below. He even thought about the person who would find him in the morning, felt a pang of guilt for that, and then told himself he'd been selfish long enough anyway. He was preparing himself, getting ready for it to be over. That's when he heard a voice. It sounded like a child at first,
then more like a young woman. He looked to his right. A young woman, perhaps 19 or 20, was sitting on the railing beside him. Dark dress with white trim, white gloves, a red and gold necklace, a little messy with her hair. Beautiful in a strange, old-fashioned kind of way. She hadn't made a sound when she arrived. He hadn't heard footsteps. He'd looked around before climbing over, and there had been no one there. She looked at him with a curious, playful expression. "What are you doing?" she asked. He told her, plainly, without embarrassment. He said he was going to jump. She asked, in a calm and gentle tone, "Why?"
And something broke open in him. For nearly an hour, Lucas talked about his failures, about the jobs, about watching his friends move on without him, about feeling like a weight around his family's neck, about being ugly and useless and tired of trying. He said every ugly thought he'd been carrying, out loud, to a stranger on a railing over a dark river. She listened to every word. When he finished with the line, "So it's just easier. Everyone would be better off without me." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, slowly, "That really sucks." She told him a little about herself, about bullying she had endured. She showed him her hand, birthmarks she'd been mocked for. She told him it gets better, not in a poster slogan kind of way, just quietly, like a fact. Then she looked at him with that same playful expression and said, "I'm Elizabeth. You can call me Liz." And despite everything, despite where he was and why he was there, Lucas laughed. "Lucas," he said. "Call me Lucas."
She looked down at the water and said it looked cold. He said he'd been planning to find out. She said drowning takes 3 to 4 minutes. He asked how she knew that. She didn't answer. They talked a little longer. She made him a deal. 1 month. He would go home, tell his family the truth. If things still hadn't gotten better, he could come back, and she would be here. He was terrified, not of the drop anymore, of that conversation. She hopped down from the railing, stood beside him, and held out her hand. "Do we have a deal?" He said yes. Lucas went home. His parents had already found the note. They were in tears.
1 month later, exactly as they had agreed, Lucas returned to the bridge at the same time, in the same spot. He wanted to tell her. He described her to his dad. He knew her very well. He went very quiet. He knew her when he was a young man in 1949. She had been a kind and gentle young woman. By all accounts, one of the most caring people in town. Severely bullied by members of her own family. Deeply unhappy. She had jumped from that same bridge. There was a memorial on the other side of the bridge. A small plate engraved with her name. And an engraving of the necklace she wore the night she died. Stones with inlets, just like the one Lucas had seen. He made a habit of leaving flowers at that plate, now and then. In 1962, France and Brazil nearly went to war over lobster. It sounds absurd, but it was real. A genuine diplomatic crisis known as the Lobster War, stemming from a dispute over whether lobster was a fish that swam
or a creature that walked along the ocean floor. France said it swam. Brazil said it walked. And Brazilian naval vessels were turning back French fishing boats by the dozen. Among the French crews operating in contested waters was a small vessel, the Miranda, crewed by 4 cousins, the 60-year-old captain, Levi, and 3 of his nephews. They were experienced, they were careful, and they had been promised protection by the French government. They worked at night to avoid the Brazilian Navy, quiet, precise, and cautious. But the sea doesn't care about caution. A sudden storm hit without warning. Not a gradual building of weather, a violent, immediate assault of wind and rain that tossed the Miranda like a toy. Equipment was damaged, ropes snapped, water poured into places it was never supposed to reach. When it cleared, everything was quiet again. Too quiet. The navigation systems were destroyed, completely waterlogged and fried. The radio was useless. One of the nephews had been badly injured, a suspected broken back, and needed a doctor urgently. And Levi had no idea where they were. The storm had pushed them off course for hours. They could be anywhere within hundreds of miles.
Levi was an experienced sailor. He coaxed the damaged engines back to life through sheer mechanical knowledge. He knew Brazil was somewhere to the west, so west they would sail, even if it meant being arrested by the Brazilian Navy. Survival first, everything else second. For 3 days they sailed. The water supply shrank. The injured nephew worsened. Cloud cover blocked the stars, and even when it cleared, Levi's celestial navigation was rusty, imprecise. He wasn't confident in anything. By the 4th night, they were still at sea. Levi lay down to rest. He woke to a voice. "Land! Land!" He was on his feet and out the cabin door in seconds. Standing at the bow of the ship was an old man, dressed in a traditional French waterproofing coat, pointing to the right, off the starboard side, still calling out. Levi grabbed his binoculars. There, far off in the darkness, was a faint pulse of light. He ran back into the cabin, rang the bell, and began shouting orders. His 2 remaining able-bodied nephews stumbled up from below, bleary-eyed, looking to him for direction. He pointed them to their stations and began steering toward the light. Gabriel, his oldest nephew, peered out at the bow. He turned to Levi. "Good eyes, Uncle. That light is very far away. How did you see it?" Levi said, "I didn't. Leo called it out." Gabriel stared at him. "Leo's asleep. You woke us up. We heard a man's voice, but it wasn't any of us."
They considered the injured nephew, but he couldn't stand, let alone climb to the deck and shout, then disappear back below without anyone noticing. They looked at each other. Then they looked at where the old man had been standing. The bow of the ship was empty. They followed the light to shore. They navigated carefully, found a port, and docked. They got a doctor for their injured crewmate. Talking with the locals, they pieced together where the storm had blown them. They hadn't reached Brazil. They were in Argentina, hundreds of miles south of their planned course. The drift had been immense. The locals listened to their story. Then came the part about the lighthouse. The locals looked at each other. There was no working lighthouse on that stretch of coast.
The lighthouse there had been destroyed years earlier, completely demolished by a violent storm. Nothing remained of it. A week later, as the Miranda made her way home, they passed the coastline again. They found the spot. The ruins of the lighthouse were still there, a crumbled skeleton of stone and rusted iron, half swallowed by the sea. The exact same place where they had seen it blazing just days before.
Thank you for watching. Stay safe out there. I'll see you next time.